welcome, Allison. With Birds of Chicago and then with Our Native Daughters, you have created beautiful, meaningful music. Yet, your first solo album is something altogether different and deeper. On it, you directly explore a very personal and painful part of your past. It sounds like it was music you had to create for your own well being. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that's very perceptive. I think it was definitely, a lifetime in the making, and excavating my history was something that I felt more and more compelled to do, to kind of reckon with it and to try to come to a place of peace, but on a personal level. But there were other factors. I mean, the work with Our Native Daughters, connecting to the pain and the history of the Black diaspora and my own family's journey and story, were very much catalysts for making the solo record. And also motherhood. I'm a mom of a now just turned 7-year-old daughter, and my history being what it is, I know the high risk of history repeating. And part of the way I think that we can stop these cycles of abuse, of bigotry, part of the way that we stop the cycle is to talk about it, and to face it. And if we don't, then quite often, if we don't reckon with it, unfortunately, too often the cycle continues. And I just, as a mom, could not. I had to know that I've done everything in my power to change the story, to change outcomes for women and children, not just women and children, of course, because this, abuse is not limited to women and children. It's 1 in 3 women, it's 1 in 4 men, it's 1 in 2 non-binary or trans folks. So it's a pandemic, really, is what it is. It's, there are 3 pandemics that we're in the midst of. COVID, of course, and COVID exacerbates the pre-existing pandemics of bigotry and abuse.
Right. So to write songs of such a nature, I imagine you have to wade through a whole complex range of emotions from fear, anger, shame, hurt. For some writers, that could be very difficult. How did you approach overcoming those challenges, if they were challenges?
Well, I think writing has always been a kind of a catharsis for me and a way to process pain. That's always been part of my writing journey, basically. I mean, that's really how it began. Before I knew that I was a songwriter, I would, be writing poems or stories or journaling. I've always done a lot of journaling as well. And I think that that's just been my medium to process the world and process how I feel about the world and how I feel about my own experiences within it. And as I realized, that I was a musician and started to come out of the closet as a musician, um, I it was just a natural extension, to start putting some of that into the songs as well. But this is really the first time, this upcoming solo record is really the first time that I've very gone deeply into this history and excavated my own personal history. And I have not done that very much prior to this in the ensemble work that I've done, either with Birds of Chicago or Poe Girl or Our Native Daughters. Yeah, it was definitely, and it's interesting, again, I think connecting my history with it, that it wasn't, that I didn't, what happened to me didn't come out of a vacuum, that, and some of the connections, sort of connecting the dots of, from my, enslaved great matriarch of my paternal family, Kashiba, who her experience of being kidnapped somewhere in West Africa, sold off the coast of Ghana, surviving that horrific Middle Passage and multiple abuses, multiple sales, enslavers, having her children taken. I mean, just, and I really had this visceral connection when I learned about her. I didn't meet my paternal family until adulthood. I didn't grow up knowing my Black family. I grew up with my Scottish Canadian mother, and my adoptive father was an American expat from Southern Indiana who was raised in a white supremacist family, in a sundown town. So he came with a whole set of assumptions about my relative value in the world, that obviously he was my primary abuser, and he was also a virulently bigoted human, who filled my ears with poison my entire childhood. So it's been a long unpacking process and a long sort of decolonizing of my own mind process and own spirit. And that will probably, frankly, that process will probably never end. You refer to shame, and I think that's a big one. I think shame keeps so many people silent, and it doesn't go away, or at least in my experience as a survivor, and I can't speak for anyone else, but it doesn't go away, but you learn to grow around it. I sort of liken it to a rusted chain around a tree, and the tree keeps growing and it grows around the chain, but the chain is still there. And, part of learning to live with and live in spite of shame is accepting the truth of the past, accepting what happened, and hopefully having more and more experiences. For me, I left that situation at 15 years old, and I've had a whole lifetime of many beautiful, loving, wonderful experiences to as antidotes to that, And so part of it is time. When you ask for me to tell this story, I think it's significant and connected that it took me this long to tell it, to write it, to go into it. I needed time. I heard an interview once with Maya Angelou where she talked about and the interview asked her, why did you stop the autobiographical I Know Why the Caged Bird Sing, why did you stop it at so young? And she said, well, the rest is too close. I can't, that's far enough away that I've processed it enough that I can write about it. But everything that was sort of near in the timeline to what her actual existence, she wasn't ready to excavate that yet. And I think there is a lot to that. I think in order to process trauma, we need time, and I've had time, and I've had a lot of love, and I've had a lot of community support. And that's the other big part of this equation. It's a solo record, but I could not have made this solo record without my unbelievably generous, loving, supportive community and chosen family. My partner, JT, who is my frequent writing partner, as well as, my life partner and the father of my daughter and our daughter, I should say. And, it's all of the incredible musicians who poured their hearts and spirits into this record. I mean, we recorded it over 4 days at the Sound Emporium in Nashville, and we actually recorded it in the fall of 2019. So just after, I'd come back from that tour with our native daughters, this incredible experience of all of us on the bus with all of our kids and a camera crew from the Smithsonian, because they were turning the experience into a documentary that's actually going to come out next month in February. And yeah, just, so it was this whole journey. And I was writing a lot of these songs that ended up becoming the solo record on the bus, sending things back and forth with my partner, JT, because I was on the bus with our daughter, and he was doing a writer's retreat in, I think he was in Massachusetts somewhere, or New Hampshire somewhere. And, we were sending these ideas back and forth. And it was at night after shows and interviews and all the rest of it, sharing a little bunk with my daughter. It was her first time sleeping on a tour bus. And, I was just scribbling these songs. They're just pouring out. And they were a lifetime in the making, but they actually kind of arrived quite close together over a period of about 3 months, starting on that bus, that Our Native Daughters bus. And the last ones I was writing on the airplane, on the way home from tour to Nashville, where we live now. And we were coming home for Americana Fest actually in 2019, and everybody, all of my beloved community happened to be in town. The Sound Emporium happened to have 4 days open, and I just discovered that the Canada Council of the Arts, which is a wonderful arts funding organization in Canada, had supported my writing request for a writing grant and a recording grant, and so suddenly we had the means to be able to do this, thanks to the Canada Council. And we just did it. And honestly, when we began, I was still telling myself, well, maybe this is just a Birds record, where it's a little bit more autobiographical. But, and my husband was like, sure, sweetie. And my producer, Dan Nobler, was like, okay. And of course, by the end of it, it was very clear that this was a solo statement, that this was a very personal statement and needed to be its own, live in its own space. And so, and then we were touring with Birds. I was working with Our Native Daughters. I didn't really, we made it in 4 days, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, wrapping my mind around trying to put myself forward as a solo artist. I had a lot of shame related blocks around that. And the pandemic happened, and suddenly I had all this time to process and sort of meditate and plan of, what could a career look like coming out of this. JT and I had been so used to the grind of sort of subsistence touring on the road. We felt like we weren't doing our jobs if we weren't touring 200 days of the year. So to be forced to stop was quite a shock, but also really beneficial for us to assess and make some changes, and I had the opportunity. We met our manager, Carissa Stolting, who's just wonderful, through our friend Abigail Washburn during this pandemic time, or just before. And, been on this whole journey of finding the right home for the record and the right team to support it. And I've just been so fortunate. And all along the way, it's been community, making those connections, uplifting, just. There's a wonderful quote that I heard Rachel Cargill say, and I believe it's an Alice Walker quote. And the quote is, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." And I've really felt that in this time of all these challenges that are being thrown at the arts communities, particularly gig workers. We are supporting each other through it, as best we can. And I've really felt that from our community here in Nashville.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the planets certainly aligned for you to be able to make this record.
Yeah.
Now, on your website, you share this eloquent and beautiful story about who you are, what you've experienced, and what brought you to live in Nashville. And you say you are a hero of your own story, and that we all are. In what way has music played into that part of your story?
In every way. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say I would not have survived my childhood or teenhood if I hadn't discovered music. I don't know that I would still, or rather music discovered me. I don't know that I would be among the living at this point. Mm-hmm. And I can't really overstate it. I think there's an interesting thing happening in our culture where we tend to minimize the importance of the arts. You see it in schools. The first funding to get cut is arts funding. The focus is on STEM, and by no means am I denigrating STEM. That's very important too. But the arts are crucial, and they're crucial for whether you're going to pursue that as a career or just as an outlet, and particularly for young beings trying to grow up in a very complicated, contradictory, scary world at times. Art is an outlet, and I've been seeing that with our daughter through these stresses of the pandemic. She's been painting up a storm. This is some of her work behind me right now. Wonderful. And, just that has been a huge outlet for her. She's been writing little songs, making up plays and dances. I mean, this has been, and it's not just her, it's all of our community's children. I've seen this outpouring of artistic process. And many of them won't become, professional artists, but it's of such deep value. And we're understanding that more on every level, the empathy that it builds, the empathy that's needed in every career, every part of life, every part of human interaction that we've seen, unfortunately, such a dearth of lately. And it's, music saved my life, and having that outlet and the people that I've met, the community that I've met through music, though that's, you know, led me to my life partner. It's led me to my closest friends, my sisters and our native daughters, my brothers and sisters in Birds of Chicago, my brothers and sisters in Capital Sunrays, my sisters in Poe Girl. Like this is family, community, and we are understanding now with this pandemic, as so many of us are experiencing greater isolation than we ever have before, how important that human connection is, and that community, that we cannot thrive without it. And we're finding ways to do it, whether it's through a virtual festival or a Zoom interview or writing songs, doing those. We did a bunch of those, Rhiannon Giddens and Layla McCalla and Amethyst Kia and I, my sisters and our native daughters, did lots of distanced videos together during the pandemic. And that was so much fun to do, where we'd each record one little piece of it and then put it together remotely, obviously. And, we played Carnegie Hall that way. It was virtually and distanced in a video that was cobbled together, but it still felt like community, and it's still community. And I just think everyone is seeing that. I've heard that from so many people who aren't, artists or songwriters, just reaching out and saying how grateful they are for, whether it's a live stream or a little song you share, or a poem, like these things. We saw it with Amanda Gorman's incredible healing poetry at the inauguration, the visceral response to that from the whole world, not just this nation. There's a reason. Words, poetry, music, art, they touch us on a deep, internal, universal human level. And it helps us connect to each other. It helps us connect to our humanity, our forgiveness, our forbearance, our compassion, our empathy. And we can't live without that. And we're in very complicated times. And that's when empathy is the most needed. When we are the most divided and in turmoil, that's when empathy is the most needed. So I think that songs have a huge part to play in that. So, yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful note to end on. I would say that, one of the amazing things about this time period is we've found a way to stay connected despite the challenges, and that when things open up again, there will be such a hunger for connection, which only music can deliver in a certain way. That, I hope you and all of your creative friends will be ready for that moment. And
we're so ready. We're so ready. It's going to be so joyful when we get to the herd levels of inoculation and immunity, and we can actually fling the doors wide again and dance in the streets. It's going to be wonderful. Yeah.